Hey guys, we're talking about the slowdown in the Chinese economy, developments in the trade war, and is Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, stepping down? We'll talk about that and more on this week's China Update. Hey, what's up guys? It's Tony here with another episode of China Update where we help you guys keep on top of the biggest developments coming out of the world's #2 economy. So I'm trained in Chinese foreign policy and economics. I work in China in an executive role, and we're putting these videos together because we want to make those big developments coming out of China more accessible to you guys. So I'm pretty qualified to talk about the China stuff, but not very qualified to film, so you'll have to forgive me. In fact, I'm filming this in my bedroom right now. That's my bed over there. If you want to join the family and jump on board with us, hit that subscribe button and hit that bell icon so then you get our videos when we release them. We would love to have you on board. Smash that like button so it tells YouTube that we're doing a decent job. Okay, let's jump into the news. Okay guys, we need to talk about the Chinese economy. As you probably know, last week the official numbers showed that for the third quarter of this year, the 3 months leading up to September, the Chinese economy grew at 6%. This is the slowest rate as a percentage of GDP the Chinese economy has experienced since records began in the early 90s, and it has concerned a lot of people. There have also been economists that have come out and said that the official number is actually probably much slower. This is not just international China experts and economists, but also economists within China. In fact, Professor Xiang Songzuo of Renmin University, one of the most prestigious universities in the country, said that growth is much, much slower. Now, Professor Xiang became internationally renowned last year in November when he presented a speech in China where he said that growth in the economy could be in the negative digits. Institutions like the World Bank and the IMF have reduced their forecasts for the Chinese economy. Now, what was concerning to me this week, however, is a story that came out that said that the Chinese government is increasing, doubling in fact, the amount of money they're spending on infrastructure projects. Now, why is this concerning? The reason why we've seen slowdown in China over the last few years is because the Chinese have gone through a deleveraging campaign. That's basically because since 2008, they've relied on credit, borrowing money essentially, to build infrastructure to maintain economic growth. However, debt levels now at the national, local, and even at the personal household level are now becoming dangerously high. So the Chinese are trying to move from a credit-driven growth model to a growth model that is based on consumption and productivity gains. However, the story that they're increasing spending on infrastructure suggests two things. They're concerned at the speed and the reduction of growth, and that they're turning to that old playbook, turning back to credit and investment in infrastructure to do it. What's also concerning is the rate of return, the productivity gains for every dollar spent on infrastructure has been slowly decreasing over the last few years. So basically, the Chinese get less bang for their buck when they invest in infrastructure. So if you're borrowing money to build infrastructure that is not very productive or doesn't have much in productivity gains, then this is not sustainable long term, and it is a sign that the central government is concerned about the slowdown. Carrie Lam, the chief executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region Government of China, has faced tremendous pressure to step down. Her government's popularity is at historical lows, and protests continue every weekend with increasing division and violence. There has been a rumor this week suggesting that Beijing plans to replace her next year, that the replacement candidate would finish her term but not necessarily do a 5-year stint, which is typical for chief executives in Hong Kong. Now in Beijing, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has hit back saying that rumors that Beijing plans to replace Carrie Lam are just that, rumors with alternative motives. So what do you guys think? Do you think Carrie Lam should step down? Write in the comments below, step down if you think she should step down, or stay in if you think she should stay in. I'd also be curious to know what your analysis is of her government's handling of the situation in Hong Kong. Now, our next piece is about the Chinese government celebrating what they say will be a slew of laws that greatly improve the business environment for foreign investors in China. One of the things we need to take into consideration here is that there's been a lot of promise fatigue. Chinese have said for years that they're going to greatly improve the business environment for international businesses, particularly when it comes to intellectual property. But there hasn't been any major developments for the last few years, despite the fact that China has been slowly increasing in its global reputation that is now in the top 50 countries for ease of doing business. Now, these laws actually fit in very, very well with the IP protection promises that the Chinese made when Liu He met with Trump a few weeks ago and they signed their Phase 1 trade agreements. The issue historically however, has been that a law is passed and then it's not implemented on the ground in China. Now, this is not because the Chinese government is nefarious and they're basically lying to people. That's not really the case. It's more because of structural issues within the Chinese economic system and the governance system where there is a gap between law and implementation. The Chinese actually have phrases like 天高皇帝远, the sky is high and the emperor is far away, or 上有政策,下有对策, above comes policy and below comes counter policy, to describe this historical phenomena of central government edicts that are not followed at the local level, and that the central government, through what is essentially a very decentralized economic structure, has great difficulty in implementing those sort of laws. So that could be an issue here, but considering that a lot of international businesses operate in tier 1 and tier 2 cities where you do have better functioning legal and administrative systems, these laws could be promising for business development. Now, why is China doing this? Is this out of the goodness of their hearts? Maybe, but the cynical side of me thinks that it's because the Chinese desperately need foreign capital. Now, you see, the Chinese are heading into a period of account deficit. Since the early 90s, essentially, the Chinese have had an account surplus, but now that they're moving into a period of account deficit, this will put a lot of strain on the economy. It will put pressure on a currency which they're already trying very hard to keep artificially high, or it could force the Chinese government to borrow in overseas currencies, which increases risk and strain on the financial system where most of the debt is actually held in the local currency. As such, the Chinese need to attract more foreign investment. Now, obviously, historically, foreign investment has been a huge part of China's growth model. They rely on foreign capital, foreign skills, and foreign technology. And that hasn't changed, but now that we're moving into a period of deficit, they need capital more than ever. So improving the business environment, specifically for foreign businesses, is their way of trying to attract that capital. But this also begs the question, how serious is discrimination against foreign companies in China? Now, the discrimination is certainly there and it's well documented, but actually there are bigger problems that don't really affect foreign companies so much as private companies, both Chinese and foreign. You see, there are two big issues that are operating within China. One is local protectionism. So this isn't national protectionism. This is where at the local level, whether it's provincial, county, or city level, local authorities will put up barriers to trade, not just against foreign companies, but against other Chinese companies in other provinces to try and protect their own local industries. And the second issue is there is not a level playing field within China for private companies, full stop, whether it's foreign or Chinese. The fact of the matter is there are so many benefits through subsidies and other preferential treatment to public entities, public companies, or politically connected private companies that regular private companies have difficulty competing. And this is also another structural issue that the central government is trying to fix. Yes, there is discrimination against foreign companies. This law may help, but the bigger issue is actually between state-owned enterprises and private companies, whether international or domestic. Now, our next story is that the Fourth Plenary session of the 19th Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party will be held this Monday for 3 days in Beijing. Now, that's a very, very long title. It's basically the top dogs. The most important leadership within the party are going to be meeting in Beijing next week. Now, what does this mean? Well, this is actually the first time in 20 months that there has been a full meeting of the Central Committee. There has never been this big a gap between two full plenary sessions for decades. Now, at the session, there are two primary matters to be discussed. One is the better implementation of socialism with Chinese characteristics. The other is improving governance. So basically, they're discussing ways of implementing policies to improve the party's control over the state, and also how to improve the effectiveness of the state apparatus within the government, how to better implement laws and policies throughout the country. Now, these sessions are typically quite boring, but there could be interesting developments that come out that have an effect on wider governance and policy implementation in China. We will let you know next week what the results of this conference are. Okay, now for our final story, let's look into a US-China trade update. Now, we were discussing last time that the phase one deal seems to be across the line. The Chinese side has confirmed that yes, there is a deal and it touches on IP and agricultural businesses. However, in the last few days, the Chinese side have said that the deal will only be implemented if the Americans remove all tariffs that have been erected since the trade war began in about April of last year. Now this is interesting because the Trump side have said that these major agricultural purchases and the IP changes are in exchange for no further tariff increases, not for the reduction in past tariffs. So it looks like there might be some disagreement on this point. Also interestingly, the Chinese side have said that they're going to buy about 20 billion in agricultural purchases from the United States. This is about the pre-trade war level of agricultural purchases that the Chinese were making. However, Trump on Tuesday said that 20 billion was not enough and that they had agreed on much higher levels. The US president said in a statement that the US wanted 70 to 80 billion in purchases, but they agreed on 40 to 50 billion. So this agreement, this so-called phase one agreement, which really is low-hanging fruit in the trade negotiations, is already facing some hiccups, with both sides producing contradictory statements regarding how much is going to be purchased. And of course, 20 and 50 billion are big differences. I still maintain that the wider China-US relationship has gone through irreparable damage over the last few years and is entering a period that will be greater defined by aggressive competition and less so by cooperation. That this trade agreement is temporary and it's on weak foundations and it doesn't deal with the structural issues in the relationship or some of the major complaints from the Trump administration and the wider business community in the US and Europe. The wider trade agreement is still not settled and we're going to continue to see exacerbation and agitation on both sides. That's our update for this week. Hope you enjoyed it. Remember to hit that subscribe button so you're on top of the biggest developments coming out of China, and smash that like button if you enjoyed this video. It's a massive help to us and we really appreciate it. We will see you next week for another China update.